What's up, everybody?
Hi! It's been 700 days since Harry and I last stepped foot off of an airplane. 700 days ago, we were arriving in Singapore from end of year Peru trip.
And this time we're back at the airport, about to fly off to the US. So it's been quite different since the last time we've flown, and we wanted to just do a video about all the things that have really changed since the last time we did travel.
So we just got out of the lounge. We were planning on recording there, but it was a little too quiet.
Way too quiet, which is usually very busy and loud, but things
Current
are
situation.
definitely more quiet. They don't encourage you to talk as much and everything like that. But thankfully, at least the lounge was open, so we did manage to grab some food. We're going to be taking a night flight, so it's going to be an 11:30 p.m. flight. We're flying Turkish Airlines for the first time. So Istanbul, and then where are we going from there?
Istanbul to Munich.
Munich, we're doing a transfer to Lufthansa to our final destination in the US, which is Boston.
So one of the things I highly recommend is that you get someone like Harry, who will do most of the research, most of the planning. I have to be honest that Harry is really good about checking everything, and thank you for making sure we're able to travel.
You definitely have to be organized.
Yeah.
I will say there's a lot of things that you need to have ready. Make sure you get used to using a checklist even before it started when you're booking your trips, making sure you're finding a flight that has flexible dates or cancellation policies. I think most flights actually these days do offer free cancellation. Like even the cheapest economy flights that I saw offer it.
If you get tested and you happen to be positive, then you definitely want to be able to change your flight to a later date.
When we were booking this flight to the US, 1 week before, it was one of those countries where if you did go, you'd have to fly back and quarantine for, I think, like a 10-day period back in Singapore, regardless of vaccination, regardless of testing negative. But a week later, which is when we booked, things changed.
So the VTL lane was a way for us to avoid having to quarantine in Singapore. Harry would literally lose his mind if he had to be locked in a hotel or in our own home for 10 to 14 days.
Depending on the country category of like risk level, you're quarantining, at least in Singapore, either 10 or 14 days. And if it's a high-risk country, you're quarantining in a dedicated hotel facility, which sounds nice, but you're also going to be shelling out like $1,300 per person or even higher or something like that. But
You don't get to choose the hotel.
No.
I know some people who had some really great hotels and other people who didn't have such a great experience.
Even like before we booked this Vaccinated Travel Lane, they did announce that the US, you would be allowed to quarantine at home. So at that point, we're like, great, we'll save some money even though we'd have to quarantine at home. I think they even made it 7 days at that point. Because of this Vaccinated Travel Lane, we no longer have to quarantine, but the only thing is you do have to take a specific flight. So in the US, there's only 3 cities that fly to Singapore with a Vaccinated Travel Lane flight. And do you know what those are?
Well, we're flying out of one of them.
Yeah. Which is?
LA.
Yep.
So LA, maybe somewhere New York.
Yep.
And maybe
There's one more on the
another-
West Coast.
Okay, maybe like San Fran.
Yep, you got it. Keep in mind, this is only going back to Singapore. Going to the US, there's different rules depending on the country. For the US, there's no quarantine.
The price also
Yes.
unfortunately varied greatly from a VTL flight and non-VTL flight, but because Harry would go crazy, we went ahead and decided that VTL would be the best choice for us.
To give you an example, when we were looking at flights, we found some awesome deals. Like it was very reasonable. Like I think it was like around $500 US dollars for a one-way ticket from LA to Singapore. The one we took at the time of booking was $1,500. So it was 3 times the price that we would have paid for a non-vaccinated travel lane flight.
And there's only one available airline
Yes.
to Singapore.
Singapore Air, which
We're
it's fine.
excited about.
We're totally fine, yeah. It's a good airline. We've heard great things. We're excited to finally fly it. We also realized that because it's going to be an expensive flight coming back, we booked our flight going to the US with points because we did find an awesome deal where we were able to get business class and not have to pay as much. So even though we're not paying as much going to the US, we do have to pay a bit more on the back end coming home.
So it kind of evens out, maybe.
Yeah, I would say so. It's going to be worth it in the end. So another thing to consider is when you're booking these flights is the testing requirements. Most places will require what's called a pre-departure test. And that's not only the one thing you have to research, but you also have to research what type of test. But the most common ones are going to be your PCR and your ART. PCR is typically more accurate, ART less accurate, but you get the results quicker, but not all countries will accept that. So it's one thing that you need to make sure you take note of is which test and what's the timeline of testing before you get to the country. The second thing you also have to consider is not only a pre-departure test, but also a test that you may need to take at the destination that you're arriving at. Thankfully for the US, there's no testing that you need to do once you're there. But when we come back from Singapore,
We need to test negative 48 hours before we head back to Singapore. And I think we're planning on doing ART.
yeah, ART is now accepted. It used to only be PCR as the option. But the US, going to the US, that just changed recently with the new variant.
Before it was 72 hours. Our departure date is on a Monday, and we were tested today on Monday.
Yeah, so thankfully our flight was at 11:30 p.m., so it gave us the whole day basically to go get tested. We live across from a hospital and they have a 24-hour clinic. You can actually walk in, although the queue was massive, so we do recommend booking an appointment if they have it available. What do you think of the overall experience?
Besides the waiting, it wasn't that bad at all. It was my first time ever taking any sort of test for COVID. I was very nervous, and having to wait an hour or so gave me a lot of time to think and get really, really nervous about what the experience would be like. But I would have to say that it was pretty easy for us.
Yeah, I think we lucked out with the ART and the guy who did the swab for us, but it was not that uncomfortable. In fact, the couple nights ago, I wanted to test it out on myself.
Just in case.
Yeah, so I had a self-test kit and tried it out. I'm pretty sure I jammed it up further than I needed to because when the guy did it for us today, it pretty much was like picking your nose, basically.
So once we arrive in Singapore, we need to take a PCR test at the airport, which will be expensive. Well, definitely more expensive than the ART test. And then we also, new update, we also have to be tested on day 3 and day 7.
But that one will be an ART test, so that might be a little bit more reasonable.
So it's extra cost that
Yeah.
originally we weren't planning on.
ART test for pricing, it was $30 today, so not too bad. PCR would have been 100 and
Either 138.
yeah, 138. I think it was 138. Coming back from the trip though, it'll be 125 for the PCR test on arrival at the airport.
Kudos to Singapore Airlines. They sent us a very thorough email 1 month ahead of everything that we need to be aware of, everything we need to sign up for, any extra apps or accounts that will help ease our arrival in Singapore.
A couple things that I didn't even think about just until now that we also need. So the negative COVID test. The other thing you need is your vaccination card. So
So we have the paper form.
we have
from
the paper
Singapore,
form, and then we have like this notarized, what is it called?
QR app.
Yeah, it's like a digital copy of it that I hope people will take. With regards to COVID tests and vaccination status and everything, it may vary country to country. So another thing to think about also is when you are going through transit countries, you should definitely look at what requirements they have. Some countries, even if you're transiting, might require a different test than your end destination. But thankfully for us, Germany and Turkey both state that it's whatever the test is that you need or whatever considerations you need for the final destination.
So Harry found out through his research that Turkish Airlines requires us to change our masks every 4 hours. And it's
Yeah.
not just any mask,
Yeah, you have to wear surgical masks, so like right here,
not this
KF94, that's a
cloth.
cloth mask. Turkish is actually the only one that I've seen so far that we have that require you to switch it out every 4 hours. But Lufthansa also requires surgical masks.
Okay.
So when it comes to traveling, you should also for sure consider the type of masks that you are bringing and make sure to pack along some extras. Before we got this vaccinated travel lane and everything like that, Singapore has a quota on how many people are allowed to come back to this country, and this was specifically for long-term pass holders. My company actually would be required to apply for us 30 days before arrival in order to come back or get approval to come back. So that's another reason why you would want to have flexible travel dates, because if you don't get approved, you wouldn't be allowed to fly back to the country. And that quota, I heard, is fairly strict, so you might not get it right away, and you might need to wait another 7 days, for example, until you can reapply and get approved to come back. Final thing I would say is make sure you arrive to the airport early. I'd say 3 hours is fine. Check-in counter actually opened 3 hours before the flight, so it's perfect timing for us. You can always wander around, and it's fairly quiet. Things might not be open, but it's better safe to be here early, because I know that the queue, thankfully not for us, but the queue behind us in Turkish Airlines was massive, and there's a few documents that you still need to sign, provide.
Read carefully.
Yeah, it was a lot of work to just check us in. I miss the days of the online check-in process. I don't know if it still exists. I feel like it wouldn't.
Will it be possible ever
We'll see.
again?
Yeah, not sure, but yeah, definitely arrive early. Make sure you have enough time at your transits as well.
Make sure you're organized and have everything ready, all the documents, all the forms, all the
Yeah,
apps.
Chantal's the gatekeeper there. She's going to be holding on to all of our documents, so I better not lose her. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So we'll walk around and check things out and head over to our gate and get on the plane and show you around.
For the first time in 700 days.
All right, let's go.
Let's go.